That would be awesome. It's my laptop. So rifle through anything. There's something on there that could get me in any trouble. So.
You were?
Got a new sound. Update my Facebook. We're good to go. All you should have to do is just stop. Keep it interesting. Yeah. Sounds good. Thank you, man. Much appreciated.
Okay. So yeah, and okay, welcome. How many here have been here all day? Good on ya. It's been great. So thanks for sticking around. I've learned a ton, which I love. And we're almost getting to the end here. To our keynote speaker, Singeli Agnew, who was a classmate of mine, actually started the graduate school of journalism the year after, at Berkeley, the year after I started, but I got to know her because I was working at Frontline World, which the office was in the School of Journalism, and Singeli was an associate producer as a student. She was one of the student associate producers that we hired. And I quickly came to realize Singeli's talents, and I actually hired her before she graduated to accompany me to Nepal. We did a story that was very much not conflict reporting about a nonprofit called Room to Read that builds schools in Nepal. And one thing the pearl of wisdom I will offer is that the secret to success is to surround yourself with people who are more talented than you. So Singeli was really fun and great to work with on that project, and we've since become great friends in addition to colleagues. And I think the most important shoot that she's been on in my life is that she was there when my daughter was born. She generously offered to document that, and little did she know that I would be in labor for 4 days. And so she would be on call for 4 days. And she actually turned down a job to document someone dying at the end of their life in order to do that, and so I'm grateful for that. And I mean, like an intrepid reporter that she is, on those final 2 days, we of course didn't know when the baby was going to come. So she's literally sleeping on the floor of the hospital room, waiting for this baby to come out. So that was an experience. But more about Singeli, as a professional, she's now a cinematographer and producer for Al Jazeera English, formerly Al Jazeera America, and works for their current affairs program, Fault Lines, which airs in more than 200 countries. Her work there has been the recipient of both an Emmy and a Peabody Award. She began her career as a photojournalist in the American West and went on to earn a master's degree from UC Berkeley's Graduate School of Journalism. She was the associate producer and a cinematographer for the Oscar-nominated documentary The Conscious MMN about the Khmer Rouge, and her camera work has been featured and broadcast for PBS, HBO, Discovery, and National Geographic. She grew up on a ranch in Montana. She spent a month at sea as part of a National Geographic expedition, has embedded with the Canadian military in the high Arctic, worked as a Trek leader in the Himalayas, and covered current affairs in more than a dozen countries. Singeli recently covered the Civil War in South Sudan and the Vigilante movement in Michoacan, Mexico. She just returned from Pakistan and Afghanistan, where she was tracking down survivors of the CIA torture program. And we're going to see the video story that she put together on that in full today. Singeli lives in Berkeley with her husband and 16-year-old daughter, and I am very pleased that she has generously offered her time to share some work and some of her stories from the field. So welcome, Singeli. I think Sachi was the first person I met, and one of the first people I met at Berkeley, and definitely one of the first I sort of admired and looked up to, and this path I continue to follow. A little bit about, I mean, I never set out to cover conflict. That's what I want to do. But as I've sort of progressed in my career, I find that I've wanted to do more and more challenging stories, and those have taken me to conflict zones. Wait, can you hear them? Oh, so a lot of my work is now set in places where there's conflict going on, but very little of my time is actually spent on the front lines. And even when it is, I think there's a little bit of a, often it's easy to think of, okay, you have a conflict, and even if you're out there on the front lines, it's like guns going off all the time. The few times that I've really wanted to capture conflict going on, I've waited days and nothing's happened. And so I just wanted to kind of put that out there. The film that we're going to show in its entirety, and then I'll show you a few clips from Mexico and South Sudan. But the recent piece that I did was about the CIA's torture program. And so very much about conflict, but you won't see that in the film. We spent months trying to track down. There was 119 men who were detained by the CIA and put through their advanced interrogation program. And we were like, who are these men? They've never been heard from. And so we set out to find them. And they're all over the world, mostly in countries that are really hard to get to. And so I wanted to show a little bit of that, and then I can kind of get into what went into making that and show a few clips. A bit more about my path. Let's see. Maybe we should just jump into showing film and maybe talk about them. Okay? Yeah.
In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, we did some things that were wrong. We did a whole lot of things that were right, but we tortured some folks.
It's been more than a year since America admitted torturing people. We're trying to interview one of them. Amar al-Baluchi is a high-value detainee in Guantanamo. He's accused of transferring money to the 9/11 hijacker. He can only communicate with the outside world through a rigorous government screening process.
Amar has written back to us. We're going to meet his lawyer now. He's got the answers to the questions that he wrote to him. Hey, James? Yeah, we're just outside.
James Connell has represented Baluchi since 2008.
Hey, how's it going? Back there. Nice to meet you too.
Much of what he knows is classified.
I'm not allowed to talk about the existence of black sites, and so much know what happened on the black sites.
Can we talk about the dark prison?
I can neither confirm nor deny that there is black prison.
Some details about the CIA's torture program were recently revealed by the Senate investigation, including, for the first time, the names of the main involved. But the world has heard very little from them so far.
That's his handwriting, yes. On his very first day, they shaved his head, and then they smashed his head against the wall repeatedly. He writes, I would see sparks of lights in my eyes. Then all of a sudden I felt a strong jolt of electricity in my head. Everything was dark, and I passed out.
That treatment was called walling. It was one of around a dozen interrogation techniques given legal approval after 9/11. But Connell says that and other methods used on Baluchi have left permanent damage. your client stands accused of involvement in things that have led to the deaths of innocent people. I mean, can you understand why there might not be a great deal of sympathy for interrogation techniques like this?
Torture doesn't have anything to do with something, and it's bigger than any one individual or any group of individuals. Torture has to do with how a society chooses to organize itself. If another future president decides to use torture again, they already have an infrastructure built.
With torture re-emerging as a US election issue, we're trying to understand what's at stake by finding the men who went through it. These letters were as close to Bellucci as we could get, but there are others out there who received similar treatment. Many never even charged with the crime.
There was a coordinated campaign in silence for torture victims. And survivors of it have never had a voice in this process.
According to the Senate's investigation, the CIA's torture program involved 119 men from almost 20 different countries. The reasons for their detention are varied. Some were linked to Al-Qaeda, others were labeled as terrorists by US allies in the region. Nearly a quarter were just wrongfully detained. At least 39 of the men were subjected to the very worst treatment. The CIA called it enhanced interrogation. We're in Istanbul to meet two of them. Mohammed al-Sharia and Khalid al-Sharif were both members of the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, or LIFG, that opposed Muammar Gaddafi.
كانت الدولية يعني قوية ومستحوذ في شيء وكان وضع يتعرف
In 2004, the US State Department designated LIFG as a terrorist group. But Mohammed and Khalid were detained the year before that, and say their battle was with Gaddafi, not Washington. When the CIA came to them, they were living in Pakistan with their families.
لكن الصور قبل في باكستان في بيشاور نفس البيت
This was just before you were detained. So, yeah, Mohammed.
الآن مع آسيا كانت في ذلك الوقت عمرها 9 أشهر. هذه مع طفلة في البيت. هذه الصورة كانت
Mohammed and Khalid were hooded, shackled, and thrown into a CIA facility they called the Dark Prison.
أنا عشت في هذه الزمن سنة كاملة يعني لازم أحفظ تفاصيل هذه يعني مقاسات وأشكال بعض الكتابة على بعض الجدران كتبتها.
For the first several months, they were often kept completely naked.
يجوز في هذه الأسئلة طبعا عندنا في السعودية هنا بطانية هناك كنسان هنا في هذا المكان يوجد حلقة التي عليها البناء هو مقيد اليدين والرجلين في هذه الحلقة ومع هذا يأتيك الحارس ويمر عليك ويفتح الباب ويدخل هنا في البضاعة حتى يرى أنك مختلفة ولست ذلك.
Mohammed and Khalid say they were chained to the walls to prevent sleep for days at a time.
الحلقة هذه يجلس يعني هكذا يد وقدم معه مع قدم ثلاثة مع بعض حتى قضاء البول أنا في مكان الزنزانة الصغيرة زنزانة أو هي قبر نعم.
Just want to people in the back can see it. Oh, there is? Okay, good. I just realized how small they are.
القضيب الذي هو معلق في أعلى السقف، وهذه طبعا كلها ملطخة بالدم. يمكن أن تكون أي شيء فقط يعني حتى يعني تتخلص منه بالعادة، يعني حتى شيء تفعله يكون أخطر شيء أشعر به أن هؤلاء ليس لديهم أي مستعد يفعل أي شيء. كان يقولون لنا نحن نستطيع أن نقتلكم الآن ولا أحد يعرف أين أنتم ولا من قتلكم.
During the interview, we were told that men didn't want to go into everything that had happened to them.
كانت مشكلة كبيرة جدا. حكيت عليه لكن
More than half of the CIA detainees told us to spend time in what Mohammed and Khalid called the dark prison. Officially, its codename Detention Site Cobalt. It was hard to believe that this place not only existed, but was built by the world's premier intelligence agency.
When the CIA Inspector General sent a team to the site, they found one detainee who, as far as they could determine, had been chained to the wall in a standing position for 17 days.
The official CIA records cited in the Senate report, even with redactions, read like a horror film. Isolation in total darkness, constant deafening music, rectal rehydration, keeping detainees in coffin-shaped boxes. The chief of interrogations said Cobalt was the closest thing to a dungeon he'd ever seen. Despite their treatment, the US never charged Mohammed or Khalid with the crime. The experience, they say, still haunts them in flashbacks and nightmares.
أنا في كثير من الأحيان يعني أكون جالس مع إسرائيل أنفصل عن الكلام اللي شغليا أنفصل عن الكلام وأغرق في بالي بالحياة كثير من الأحيان الأطفال يتساءلون ليش أنت ما بدأت تسرح؟
Do you think there will ever be a day when you tell your children what their father has been through?
نعم. نعم.
Islamabad, Pakistan. After 9/11, the CIA was operating in the open, picking people up and taking them to black sites. Mohammed and Khalid were captured not far away. One of the most frightening things they told us is that interrogators warned them they could die in the prison. And that if that happened, nobody, not even their families, would know about it. It turns out that did happen to someone.
Thank you. All right. Okay, so we're on. That was Dr. Garrett Bahir. He was detained by the CIA in 2002 in a huge raid that took place here in Islamabad. He rarely speaks to the media, but he said he's going to meet us first thing in the morning outside the house where the raid took place.
Pakistan has often been a refuge for groups engaged in the conflict next door in Afghanistan. After 9/11, some of those people became CIA targets.
Hi, how are you? Very well. So it's on this week. Yes. Okay, we'll follow you.
Hey, how's it going? Nice to see you.
Dr. Bahir was part of an Afghan organization called Hizb Islam. The group itself has never been on the US terror list, but members of its offshoots have.
They came from this way, actually, this road from here up to there, it was blocked. There were about 200 people. Police and intelligence guys and Americans.
Americans
Yeah,
as well.
yes. It was 2 o'clock midnight.
Bahir was handcuffed, hooded, and taken away, along with his friend and former driver, Muhammad, who years earlier was a bodyguard for the group's leader. That was the last time Bahir saw Gul alive. They were flown separately, in hoods and shackles, to detention site Cobalt. Gul was beaten and doused in cold water by CIA interrogators. On November 19, 2002, he was left chained to the floor of his cell, half naked. In the morning, Gul Rahman was found dead. The CIA listed hypothermia as the likely cause of death.
So this is a letter from his daughter. My dear father, I'm waiting for your coming. ما بزلكي داس وان بيدا كاوشي أيه أطلع بختول أولاد دو أدراني أطلع شناي والزلوت لارو بكي حال مظلوم أو يتم لارو.
Gul Rahman is the only detainee known to have died in the CIA torture program.
He was not just a patient. He was a human being. He was a father of 4 or 5 daughters. He has an aging and ailing mother.
Gul's family has never spoken on camera. They live in an Afghan refugee camp in the tribal areas. It's hard for foreign journalists to go there. But Bahir has offered to take us. As a tribal elder, he's told us he can guarantee our safety. But he wants us to keep a low profile.
Just ask my people to wait there in the gate. I'm not going to inform the people, but just wait in case something happens.
So there's a couple of checkpoints leading into the camp. There's a bit of concern that we might be stopped. Dr. Rahir is calling ahead and trying to let his guys know we're on our way. Bahir is worried about attracting attention. At several points, we're told to hide the camera. Eventually, we pass through the last Pakistani checkpoint. From here on in, we're on our own.
So all of this area is on the center of command. Yes.
This is actually the camp.
Yeah, it's a huge camp. This is Boka.
And the arms.
Yeah, they're all people. They're here for your security.
It's a short drive to the Rahman family home.
That's Habib. So that's the family's house.
Yeah.
Gul's brother, Habib, took over care of the household, and his brother disappeared.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So this is Gul's house, and his wife and mother still live here, and his 4 daughters. We're just trying to work out if we can speak to them on camera. Eventually, we're invited to come in with the camera. Gul has been dead for more than a decade now, but this seems like a house still in mourning. For Gul's mother, one of the most painful things is that her son didn't get a proper burial. She says the Americans never returned his body. In fact, it turns out the family went for years without knowing anything at all, despite relatives continually approaching the authorities. The Americans had not only detained Gul, he died in their custody. Yet Habib showed us communications from US officials years after his death, simply stating that they weren't holding him.
It says they advised that no person of this name is currently being held. And this was in 2004 when they got this letter.
Yeah.
When do they actually learn of Gul's death?
The family says nobody from the CIA has ever contacted them about Gul's death. Habib only learned how his brother died from news reports. He's kept the details hidden from their mother. He says it would break her heart if she knew.
كانت لك وتقولنا صبح بس أنا كثير كده من سخط على هوا والسر زود بيد الهوا مسيحاتي من هذه الأشياء يوم مسلم يغير مسلمات سهروني بس يخي وجود هذا بيني في بالي وسيتي سي أما عشان بتحسب بس
We couldn't find anything in the report about Gul Rahman's body, but it's likely it was very close to the facility where he died. We know that was detention site Cobalt. And based on our interviews with detainees, we believe the dark prison and Cobalt were the same.
So many of these details are redacted that it's hard to know the exact spot of where the prison was. But for the accounts of the detainees who were taken there, we now know that country X is probably Afghanistan.
This is Kandahar, Afghanistan. We've managed to contact two men here who say they were also in the dark prison. We're hoping they'll help us confirm its location.
So the man we're trying to find here in Kandahar was detained at around exactly the same time when Gul Rahman died in CIA custody.
The CIA believed Shawali Khan was a threat to the US, but they also picked up his brother Nazar. Nazar is one of 26 men the Senate investigation found were wrongfully detained. Yet, even though he didn't meet the standards for detention, interrogators recorded Nazar's crying and used it to threaten his brother. Their stories echoed those of others we'd spoken to about the dark prison, but they had some new details.
Can you give us any information on exactly where the dark prison was located? Anything at all?
Some people say that there's a place, this one here, where people were being held.
Do you think the prison was that kind of size? I mean, was there any details that you can give?
Shawali Khan's descriptions matched others we heard, and Kite, our producer in Kabul, says people there knew it as an old brick factory. He says he can take us there.
He goes to the airport, goes back. So now you will make a turn to the left, to the left.
It's no longer a CIA black site, but the area is still used by Afghan intelligence.
So it's a big secret place that they don't want anyone to know what is going on.
What would happen if we got caught?
We will be definitely arrested. And for 72 hours, the people spread out telling anyone.
We're going to try to film, but only from inside the vehicle.
The stuff there with the people, we can take the breath.
It's impossible to confirm the exact location. But Kite says most Afghans believe what detainees refer to as the dark prison was once here.
Can you see the tower? That's the first security tower. That's the perimeter there. Yeah.
From satellite maps, it looks like the original factory building is gone. There's now a large compound of new buildings. The white ones you can see in the distance.
Right over there, that's the exact spot.
It's eerie to me, after talking to men who likely arrived at this same spot in hoods and shackles. if you were driving down this road on any given day, it's as if none of this ever happened.
It's obviously a really highly secure location, and I think one of the guards just saw it, so we should probably move. But we've had all of those stories to finally see the place that we understand is the location of like the dark prison. It's just a weird feeling, but yeah, it's definitely going to
The CIA declined to give us an interview or answer specific questions we sent them. In fact, the agency wouldn't even confirm the dark prison ever existed.
So this happened more than a decade ago to a small group of people, some of whom considered themselves enemies of the US. Why should ordinary Americans care about this?
اليوم حدث علينا نحن هذا الأمر، غدا حيحدث على ناس آخرين، ربما بعد ذلك تصبح جزء من المواطنين الأمريكان يشكلون خطرا على الحكومة الأمريكية، فهتدخل معهم هذه الإجراءات. الموضوع أن الحكومة الأمريكية خلقت العهد بينه وبين المواطنين.
The prison itself may have been raised from a map completely. But the men who spent time there say what was done to them will live on in their minds forever.
هذا الطبيب عندما كان يمارس، أو هذا المحقق عندما يمارس تلك الأفعال القذرة، هذا هو أنا أخاطب نفسي وأخاطب الآخرين. هل ما فعلتم يتناسب مع إنسانية؟
Probably the easiest to kind of, I want to run this more as a conversation, but as a way to start, kind of break down what went into this piece, and then I can show you more clips. I feel like for any story, I'm always balancing, sort of the editorial, the story I want to tell, and what's emerging, and like what I want to go after, and what I know is strongest. And behind that, pushing against that is just access issues. People who are willing or not willing to talk at places you can or can't get to, and things you can't afford. And then on the other end of the spectrum is just managing the risk of all of that. And this one is a great example of that because there was incredible stories, like just bone-chilling stories that we were encountering, often in places that we couldn't get to, and people who were just too traumatized to speak. So there was a lot of like figuring out, okay, where and what can we do? So that's sort of the starting place. And most of my work as a producer, I shot this too, but I sort of took it from the start to the finish as a producer. And I feel like the main bulk of the work is in the planning. And that's where you're managing the risk, that's where you're sort of making it all happen, is in the planning stage. And so a few pieces, just sort of anecdotes that went into this. First was communication with these guys. A lot of them are under great threat. And so from the very outset, I had to figure out how I was communicating with them. And often that was through various encrypted phone systems. Some of them didn't have access to that, so it would be even trickier to sort of figure out how to communicate with them. Not just to protect me, but more often than not to protect them. So that was one issue. And then there's always, I'm trying to talk to everyone and get as much information as you can, but in a story like this, it was very sensitive, and I didn't have a lot of people to know. So, for instance, going to Kandahar, where at the end of the film, we meet those two brothers right before they go to the prison. We didn't want anyone to know that there was a Western team coming to Kandahar. It's a place where journalists rarely go, Westerns rarely go. The minute you touch down, you're target. And so part of our sort of risk management on that was just to not let, like, we had one person who did the overcoming. He did the communication with the driver, with, everyone in the town. He didn't really know what was up or what to do. So that was, just little things like that. I'm always kind of thinking strategically from the start. Building the team for this was a huge sort of challenge and puzzle. It took place in so many different countries, but we had to do it for budget reasons. We had to do it and so the guys that opened the film that are from Libya, we had originally planned to go to Libya, and I hired our company Jazeera. Currently, at least when I was planning to go, they required a security company to go with you. So they could operate them. And so I had literally set everything up with this British security firm, this one guy that would come and travel with us, be in the country and go to their homes and meet them. And the whole thing got called off by, the time that I had been communicating with them. One of them had gotten representation from the ACLU, which is great news. It's an amazing thing that you have representation. But the power of lawyers is just the whole thing got shut down based on that. And of course, his client can't talk. So that trip got called off, and by the time we put it all back together, we weren't allowed into Libya. And there were sort of specific reasons, but I had to figure out how to get them out, so we ended up flying them to Istanbul. So the other thing I just, I'm thinking of from the start is access issues, like getting into Tripoli, getting them to Istanbul. It took a few months to get them visas. It took me 6 to 8 months to get a journalist visa. So building a team, accessing paperwork from the start, like from the get-go, those are two things that I'm thinking about. The trip to Pakistan, it comes off as sort of like nothing really happens, but that was the trickiest, most challenging part of the trip, hands down. I don't know if the journalist is going to journalist to the rest of it's been very long. And Al Jazeera goes all sorts of places all over the world. To get the sort of risk managers in Doha to agree to let us do this was like moving a mountain, and almost got canceled as well. And I think one of the main reasons that we were able to do it was that the way we came into it was through this detainee who would go with Dr. Here, who happens to be like sort of the tribal element of that. And since we were traveling with him, it meant that we were much less at risk and sort of under his care, if we didn't ignore his guidance. But even under those circumstances, we were in that house and we can't for an hour for it to finish. And we had, 2 people were sent to the camp beforehand, like the day before, to check out the security clearances and it was just this entire event, and I did in and out in an hour. The Afghanistan piece, again, the big thing there is just, as you know, with Afghanistan, it's just a lot of limited movement. I told you about how we had to plan. But even just around living anywhere in the city, you can only stay in one location. And then you can only stay in one location for 30 minutes. And driving by that prison, what you see in the film in terms of, sort of plays to the story, but it was absolutely accurate that if we had been caught, we probably would have been in prison. So that's sort of some of the pieces that went into the planning of that. And then in terms of while I'm in the field, I feel like there's a few rules that I live by when I'm in this environment. And one of them is that whoever is, whoever's part of the team, and on this one it was a correspondent as South and a local fixer. Often there's a translator too. but not always. So it was at minimum, so at minimum, I think people often 5 subjects. And when we're doing something risky, I mean, I think the riskiest things here were going to church. I always have the person who is like, who wants to be serious, but who is most uncomfortable by the policy shot. You're never like pushing anyone to do something they don't want to do. And I think that that's just the sort of fundamental the way I live by it. And part of that is just empowering everyone with information. You know? Like when we got to the hotel in Kandahar, we worked with this great local thanks to so like, definitely be arrested. The first thing he did is like show us our exit strategy from the hotel. So it's like those sort of things were always on. Everyone on the team is like, okay, this is how we leave if something happens. Everyone has the number of the driver, and the whole team is empowered to react and to know what to do if something happens. And that means that if someone's uncomfortable, they're assessing the same information as someone else. And referring to that level of comfort. What else am I thinking about during production? And again, please guys, just like, it gets juicier and better. Ask questions and things like that. So.
How do you do our master's election?
Good question. Yeah, I was a little worried about that because I hadn't been to Afghanistan before this trip, but it didn't. It actually helped. I think the only reason we got in to talk to the mother and the sister at the House of Vigilante is because I was a woman. They weren't going to allow the correspondence. It was just me with the family. And then I think they kind of just decided that everyone can come in. But it was very helpful. And part of my emergency kit, we were in Kandahar, was full of items. Like if we had to leave town, not on the airplane, driving, I would have covered completely. The biggest risk was just so on the trip to Shamsi to the Red Ward, I was fully covered in black scarf. But yeah, it didn't, I mean, I think you're kind of seen as like, I wasn't seen as a woman, I was just seen as like a foreigner. And, you know, I dress very differently. If I'm not wearing traditional sort of coverings, which is mostly just in the car, because once I'm not in the car, it's very obvious that I'm not. It's just like I'm traveling down the road, I'm not positive. Attention. But once I'm out of the car, it's very obvious that I'm Western. And so then it's just about modesty. And, but yeah, I don't think it was an issue at all. And I think it helped me, and I think in most situations, that's true. I mean, oh, the one thing it did affect though, the sound, because I couldn't touch any of these men. And usually I place the mics. And so I was having translators place the mics. And they would always get it wrong. And we were in the middle of like a sensitive conversation. And so it was like, that's what it did affect. When I was a woman, no, I mean, for this story, it was mostly people we've been speaking to for a long time and they had to talk to us. On the street, Kandahar was hard to film on the street. I wasn't able to do that very much just because of the risk. It was really brief and really quick. So I couldn't, it was so quick. I was just like getting it done and I couldn't even tell. Pakistan was two ways. One of the brothers, the one who, he's actually in the Senate report. So if you guys haven't checked out the Senate report, it's incredibly popular. It's just the very, it's just the summary. It's available to the public, but it's pretty incredible. And it lists the younger brother who does less of the talking, who's actually listed as sort of mentally challenged. And he was held for under a month for mental abuse. Because I think they weren't holding him for any reason except to, as leverage against the other brother. The other one, the bigger one, was sent on to Guantanamo, and so many went to Guantanamo, sort of went through the process and eventually it was, it was just see that amazing other fault lines person laying who fact checked all of this and helped me probably blur that out. Lauren Rosenfeld, who's in the back, who should be speaking as well. Sachi's making fun, tell us who you are. Has also done some incredible reporting. Most recently did a piece in Chicago about gun violence in children, which is really a must-see. You can find, is it online? No, really incredible. Other questions, guys, about this piece? Yeah, it was tough. I mean, I think part of the reason these voices haven't been heard is just how tough it is to get to them and how unwilling a lot of them are to talk. I mean, a few really want to tell their story. Of the 119 that are officially listed as Cinematographer detainees, I probably spoke to about 15. A lot have just disappeared. So months went into just figuring out who was out there, how we could get to them. Some of the ones who went to Guantanamo are a little easier because often they had representation. So I called all the Guantanamo lawyers to see what names I could match up with the CIA list. We didn't have this list of names until the Senate's report came out. And then with that report came this list of names. So, and often those are like pseudonyms, so even figuring out who's who is even tough than that. But one place I started was with the Guantanamo lawyers and just seeing who came up with. There's a few journalists around the world that have kind of started digging. Like there's an effort underway to figure out who they are. There's a place out of London called the European Journalism that has done the most comprehensive tracking. A few of them have just wanted to get their story out there and so come forward and they're so it was like looking for news reports from various countries that so Yemen, Pakistan, Algeria, and putting through different reports around how else? We have, so I think this story really lends itself. I mean, I'm not sure I could have done it without the Jazeera because I think it did allow the names to move to many of the people in various countries to find people. And, there's a lot of anger towards the US, if I was just said, American journalists, but that helped a bit. We also worked with, there's a man who works for Al Jazeera who in 2006, but he was a cameraman and he was mistakenly arrested and thrown in Guantanamo and was there for years and then was released. And he calls himself sort of the only journalist to be embedded in Guantanamo. And during his time there, started interviewing people. When they get out, he's often the first person to reach out to them. So through him, we were able to, we sort of built a network of people that then let us out. So that was, and it often really affected whether people would talk to us was how we came to them. Coming to them through the right channels. Like Dr. Bahir, who takes us to the camp. I came to him through this guy in London. And actually, huge shout out to another amazing reporter, Kathy Gannon of the AP. She's a Canadian journalist who broke the story of Gulon's death. And I just cold called her out of the blue when I was beginning this project, knowing that she had broke the story. And she's just one of these generous, amazing journalists. And she shared Dr. Legar's number, which was incredible. Like, many journalists wouldn't do that. And she did. And the family saw her as having done a huge service to the family. They actually didn't believe the reports until the Senate report came out, but she was a trusted figure, so she led me to that. This one, I mean, it wouldn't. This one was, the shoot was probably. This shoot was represented in this film was probably 12 days. And we ended it in 3 weeks. But the pre-production was a long time because it was just waiting. It was a huge waiting game. I think it was, I have this wrong, but it was about 8 months of just, and I wasn't working on this the entire time, but I was waiting for my visas. I was waiting for various access issues to clear.
I have to ask the old equipment question here. I assume you travel pretty light?
Yeah, I do. This was shot with a C300. We shoot, and that's mostly what I've been shooting lately. Yeah, in PAL, which is maybe why you saw some jerking on this.
So the C300 is like the one up from the Canon. It's like their cinema camera.
Yeah, it's sort of that big. And I like to shoot with a fixed 35mm lens that's really bright. So most of this is shot with that. It's not an expensive lens, but it's one of the few prime lenses that has image stabilization. So it's really nice to shoot on.
And you don't carry lightweight like the tripod?
On this I did no lights, and I don't think I shot a single, well, the one shot of the mosque in Istanbul on
Very steady.
That's where having a translator is huge, right? Because it's the advantage of having an interview in foreign language. You always have a moment to move. So I'm in between every question and every answer. I have time to change to get both. Otherwise, yeah, it's just being really fast. Or we do things at the end where occasionally I hate doing it because it never carries off as genuine, but sometimes we have right at the end. It's never a separate event, right at the end. But in this one, no, it's all just a pause. This one was just two of us between all the countries, but in each country we picked up, and that was so key. I mean, and I'm going to show you a few other clips from Mexico and South Sudan. That is like the key piece to any piece I do and any sort of work I do in a conflict zone is who we're working with locally. And the vetting of those people, making sure you know who they are, that they're trusted, is enormous. Picking the translator is really important. On the interviews that we did this time with the Woodward guys, I think that level of emotion that we had from him wouldn't have been possible with a poor translator. We got this incredible translator who, and it took a long time to find someone who spoke Turkish, Arabic, and English. But he was amazing, and he had worked with trauma victims before, and so he had sort of the sensitivity and an understanding of what we were doing, and really made a huge difference. So in Turkey, it was correspondent myself, the translator, and a diver. And we had sort of someone that I hired to sort of help on the side but not travel with us to the distance. In Pakistan, it was the two of us, a driver, a local field producer, and when we took the trip, we had an extra car and an extra submitted area. We were specific to the region. In Kandahar, it was just three of us. But usually it's, I mean, often our films are three. Like shooter, producer, is two separate people.
The other security problem for things when you went to those countries, like you encounter like security forces, military hour patrollers and police, or anything like that. Like were they like a hassle sometimes? Trying to get permission to use their areas?
I mean, that was one of the main, a lot of planning went into avoiding those situations because it would have prevented us from getting to the refugee camp. Definitely when we were filming the prison, the location of the former prison, I mean, we were doing that essentially illegally because we weren't supposed to be filming that. And so it was a lot of that piece of it was just taking great measures to go undetected very quick. And things like, we went twice and took a different car. I knew the face of the driver because he lives there. Like there's a lot of things we sort of managed around avoiding any sort of encounter or conflict. Same with the trip to the refugee camp. We sent 2 people ahead of time to check out the checkpoints. We covered ourselves. We sort of had, so no, we were lucky. And there's been other stories I've done that I'll show you a clip from South Sudan. So I made 2 trips to South Sudan to cover the civil war there. It was 2 years ago now. And one of the big challenges of that shoot was trying to get both sides, right? And in order to get the rebel side, we couldn't cross the line. We couldn't cross from one side's territory to another. So we had to leave the country, go into Ethiopia, and literally only traveling like they're a few miles from each other. But we had to literally go all the way around in order to get, access territory from the other side in order to avoid being, coming from the enemy's territory when we didn't target. And it's an interesting story only in that, like, we did everything right in terms of getting people. I'm getting into Ethiopia. I've never been to a country that required more sort of registration, paperwork, this and that. But we also had to cross a border that was not the official border anymore. It's rebel territory. And so there's always an element of like kind of making it up as you're going along. Like there's no way to officially plan to cross into rebel territory. And so it's a long way around to answer your question. On this trip, I was very lucky, and I had never encountered it. Sorry, say it again.
Was there any other photos like investigating those?
On this particular story, first of all, I don't think anyone's ever been up to visit that family. We did it first, probably because it's, really, yeah, people have definitely been stopped and been arrested and been detained. In figuring out how to get there, I talked to a dear friend who's a Pakistani American who works a lot in Pakistan. He just returned from Peshawar, which was just near where we went, and they've been, traveling around doing the story, and ISI, which is the security service in Pakistan, sort of similar to the CIA here, showed up at their hotel room that night, and it was really scary. And they were okay, they were arrested, they were let go, things like that, things that happen. Just to finish the story of South Sudan, we crossed over from Ethiopia into South Sudan, totally fine. And then somehow a message was relayed to us that we had to cross back right away, or they wouldn't let us back. And so we're like, okay, cross back. And waiting for us was the Ethiopian authorities on that side. And we somehow become embroiled in a bit of a territorial sort of rivalry. They were upset that there were, it's a hard thing to explain, but basically, even though we've done everything right, and all our people have been we've gotten embroiled in sort of a very local conflict. And it went all the way up, and we were, all our equipment and our team got detained a whole afternoon. And then they wanted to send us back to LA, which is where we got our visas from. And there was no reasoning for it, but we basically got deported from the country. Long story short.
You've touched upon it a little bit, but being an American working in Afghanistan and Pakistan, where the US might not have the best reputation, and then at the same time representing an Arabic media outlet, what has been the advantages and the disadvantages of that?
Advantages and disadvantages. I guess I would say it's only once you start to get into conversation with people that it becomes. I mean, there's dangers. If people know, I mean, how Jazeera, people know American, both things hold dangerous depending on who the person is. But once you're in conversation with people, there's very much sort of a deepened understanding that they might need American policies, American people don't all hold those beliefs. And it just becomes a lot more nuanced. And same thing with saying. But yeah, I think both things actually are huge liabilities. And it's kind of hard to escape now. I think in this, yeah, and where we're at right now in the world, it's so polarized. But, I mean, in the time I've worked for Al Jazeera, it's become more and more dangerous to go to more places because the government is just stopped so much thought. I think after 9/11, being an American, there's more places that it's really dangerous to go. It's definitely feels like everywhere's going to be.
I've got questions. I used to work with Jackie Bennett and so one thing I'm always curious, like, what do you imagine your next job? Because I feel like in some respects it's really, like, you're in a great spot right now for what you do, but there's so few media organizations kind of investing.
Yeah.
So where can you, like, if not here, where else?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons I feel really lucky that I've gotten to, I've spent 3 years producing with Faultlines, and it's the main reason I've done it is because there's very few places that are sending journalists and spending money on long form international current affairs. And so, I feel really fortunate to have gotten to do this for 3 years. But how that happens is, I think in terms of my personal goals, with Faultlines, it's a very limited format, right? We're always working with correspondent. And it's interesting to just talk about that as a tool because it allows us to do things a lot more quickly, right? If you're just doing a verite film and just the subjects are speaking, it takes a lot longer. Material, just editing takes longer. The correspondent kind of short circuits the process of it. And so it's a handy thing when you're doing current affairs. But it's also, as a filmmaker, I have some like, enough correspondent, like I just want the people to talk. So I think personally, I'd love to be doing similar things, but not always with correspondent. I definitely feel like the stories that I've tackled have become, sort of more serious and more challenging as I've gone on. Like I've really got a lot out of doing this process. This film is fascinating, and so I'm always kind of looking for myself, like, where am I going to learn most? And that's a big goal. Is like, what story, what project, what outlet is going to challenge me.
So I have one other question. How does a 16-year-old feel about your work?
Good question. So I didn't really do a lot of traveling until she was about 8. And it's sort of increased since then. I have a very wonderful partner who's in part of the house, so that was a huge difference. And I think now that she's older, she gets a lot out of it. I'll show you a clip from Mexico. This journalist I worked with, she's from Argentina, and has a small daughter, and has done incredible. She was a news reporter for ages before she had a kid, and then she had a kid, and she couldn't stop. And she told me once that she wrote a letter to her daughter about why she does this. And she hasn't, she won't give it to her daughter. She'll probably give it, but it's there. She happens to it, or when she's older, and it inspired me. I've done the same thing. It's sort of like, it was a really interesting process to kind of try to explain to the child you're responsible for why you leave and put yourself in it. But I think now she thinks it's my first year that she's going to become a I shouldn't say this back to this class because you're all becoming journalists, and it's the most amazing profession. Also really tough. But yeah, I think she thinks it's pretty cool. I remember when she was like 6, and I was still kind of like shooting rock, I was like shooting a lot of music stuff then. And so I would go off at 9 p.m. She was in the back. Oh God, this is a rock show. Like, it was the most boring thing in the world. She didn't get it.
What was so significant for you as a photographer and for a new organization like Agnew to tell the story so visually? For example, yes, for example, going through prison, that's something that time, money, and safety is a big concern. Why not just show it from that? What was the significance of y'all?
That's a really good question, because I think part of the reason, and it sort of is at the root of why we decided to do this, because there's been a lot done about torture, a lot done about block sites, but a remarkable lack of outrage that, for years and years we didn't do this, and then as a country, and then decided it was okay. And there's been kind of to me, sort of a surprising lack of response to that pretty monumental scene. And I think part of that is that it's been so anonymous. It's almost hard to see as real that these were actual individuals. And it's just names, or it's just someone from something, it's just this list from Roger Ware. It's just easy to sort of okay and to pass off. And so I think breaking through the anonymity and the secrecy, anything so that with having to do with the CIA and sort of national security is so hard to access and see, and to somehow make that visual and very specific, even though it's still a lot of guesswork. It was really important. So that was, that sort of making it real and making it specific and human and how much did you storyboard and script before the process? It's so hard in documentary because you never really know it yet. So I'll have an idea. I'll change it. But Yeah. I mean, this one I had a lot of time leading up to it. So I had several sort of script outlines or story outlines that felt pretty solid, that changed quite a lot. But it depends on how long I have. I mean, I definitely feel like no matter what, even if it changes, it's helpful. Just in organizing my thoughts and like what's important and what we're doing after. From the very beginning, I had a picture of us driving out to dark prison from the very beginning. And that ended up happening. And from the very beginning, I imagined going to visit his family, and I didn't. I mean, it really was not a for sure thing. I had no idea that Muhammad moved in 75 with 80 years I had a picture of him drawing, So, but how the film sort of was structured happened in post, and it was really fast, and so sort of stayed like, okay, this is what I can do. But yeah.
As the narrative grows and while you're out on the field, is there ever a point, or with working with Jazeera, is there ever a point where like you get some insight and the narrative changes, and are they okay with maybe the direction shifting, or do you have to keep the narrative very straight?
Yeah, that's been another real benefit of this show is that, I work with an MP who sort of calls the shots, but he kind of just gives us a lot of trust and lets us get on with it. EP, executive producer. So it's an editorial role, he's my boss, and he's the one who he didn't do this film until it was. I've had other films I showed him, and he's been like, okay, I want you to redo this and redo this. This one, for various reasons, it's not all having to do with the film, but he's like, great, it's good. But he's always doing the sign up for it. And he mostly trusts us too. Like we have a mandate, we have to do the show has to do with US policy. So if it somehow has to do with US policy, it's okay. Yeah. It's pretty free. Yeah, we sent it to all of them. The guys from Libya who spent 3 years with us were like, why is it so short? And the family, Rahman's family, they have not seen it because it's hard. Their nephew saw it, who's a cop, who's not the film, and he was really but the mother doesn't even know what happened. So she probably won't see it. The brother will eventually, there's no Wi-Fi, internet access. So I don't know, it'll be until Dr. And I'm hoping the brothers in Kandahar have seen it. I've talked to them, but I'm not sure if they've seen it. So you spoke about the risk management that they also consider session on trauma. No, as far as that goes. No, I think that's, as you probably, I wasn't at this session, but it probably came up that that's not really part of to address that. We're kind of all, it's common. I guess one thing that's made it easier for me is people often ask, isn't it depressing? And I guess my response to that is that everyone I know, in South Sudan, is incredibly depressing to this. So many people die, and it seems so intractable, and it's just, people just killing each other for really ridiculous reasons. And it's really, it was the hardest country, hardest story I've ever had to do. But even within that, you're meeting people who are so resilient and full, just like full of life and love and kindness. and still laughing. And so that's the kind of thing that makes it really not depressing, and actually, they want their stories to be out there, and so you feel like, it actually feels like you can kind of move through that with action in some way, like you're bringing your story out, meeting people who are still really positive in that situation. So for me, that's one of the main things. It's just like those personal connections that happen. And then I guess it's just talking to the colleagues. Yeah, I mean, like, every day at the end of the day, we have a beer together and talk about what happened. And, often it's like what went wrong, what went right, but also it's just like, wow, that was great. Those were situations I really yeah, we're gonna raise the we're gonna try and raise the screen. We're gonna try to figure out.
This session is going to go a little long, so I know some people have classes to do, but there is a reception and we're all invited. It's 6 o'clock. We have food in the hall.
I know I gotta go, but I'm trying to.
Hello. So we're not done. We got some feedback that some of you might have had trouble seeing. So we wanted to raise that. We have about a half hour left, and love to see some clips and then have some more time for Q&A. And then there's going to be a reception that everyone's invited to at 6 o'clock.
So I'm going to show you, this is from a couple clips from.
If we could have everyone's attention back.
I covered what's called the autodefensa and Vigilante movement in Michoacan, Mexico, a couple years ago. So just a little background. There in the state of Michoacan, there was a big problem with the Mexican cartel, which was, taxing a lot of people, killing a lot of people, and then there was this sort of uprising of what's called autodefensa. So it was a very, if anything in Mexico, really complex situation to try to figure out what exactly is happening. How many of you have seen the movie Cartel? Yeah. So it's a great film, and it's about the same subject matter. I was so jealous because I could tell it was a really amazing story unfolding before me, and they had little things on the ground that they were there over the course of a year and a half. But what was really unusual about it was like the access to the players, because they felt like, these were people who were rising up and doing crazy stuff, but because they felt like they had the people behind them and were doing the right thing, were kind of inviting us in and to really get to witness some of the stuff that I think ordinarily this was, remember earlier I said very seldomly am I actually trying to capture actual conflict. And this was a situation in which we really were hoping to get some sort of, document some sort of actual conflict that was happening, but nothing actually went on in the internet. There's a lot of I think I have a line in the film that it was at the point that we were there more. And all of this is to just say that the footage that opens that I'm going to show you is not shot by me. It was shot by the still photographer who also had a video camera, I think, attached to his hat. He's from France, great guy. And strangely, not strangely, but ironically, Cartel Land also used I just saw it recently, and they must have seen it here and then found the same thing, because they also had trouble getting an actual firefight. And so this is the one, like, real firefight from the Michoacan that's been used, and we found it from this guy. I mean, we just knew he'd been there at this one battle, and like, did he take any video? We called him, and he had. So that's, if any of you are videographers and looking for stuff, think of the still photographers who were there and like, also shot video. So I'm just going to show you a clip of that, and then I'm going to move ahead and show you a clip that kind of has to do with your question about, well, I'll show it now.
A group of armed vigilantes is trading machine gun fire with members of the Knights Templar cartel. Until early this year, the town of Michoacan in Mexico's western state of Michoacan was under the control of the cartel. But after more than a decade of fear, something changed. These men armed themselves, and town by town, they began to drive the cartel out. They called themselves autodefensas, or self-defense forces. Their leaders claimed that 20,000 have joined the arms movement. Their advance has been welcomed by many, but it's also plunged the state into a new kind of lawlessness. We've just arrived in Michoacan, and we've heard that 4 heads have been discovered on the steps leading to this church here in the small town of Sacana. It's a gruesome warning from the Templars as the autodefensas approach this town from the south.
I will just move ahead and show you the
Many of the leaders of the autodefensa groups are businessmen like Paco. They own big lime or avocado plantations. Others are field workers or returning migrants. Some of them are even professional mercenaries. We followed Paco's group as they patrolled the area around Los Reyes. It was immediately clear how much authority they gained here. On the road, they forced the state prison van to stop.
They believe that some state employees have been trying to get the Templars out of these towns, and that's why they stopped this town.
The policemen put up no resistance.
Es 022864.
They were clear to drive on, but the power dynamic was obvious. These sorts of scenes are going on all across Michoacan because for years government authorities have protected and aided cartel members. The Templars have made huge profits through drug trafficking and extortion, and use part of that.
I mainly just wanted to show that police clip because, I mean, one thing, is before any story, going into any sort of zone where there's conflict, I think one of the most, you guys I'm sure have talked about this, Sachi, but is really understanding the roots of that conflict and also like who the players are and what the stakes are. I mean, who would have thought that, we'd be with these guys who were then holding up the police? It's that sort of thing. It's sort of, I felt like that illustrated what was happening in the state of Michoacan. We were not, there was no authority to keep us safe. There was no authority to keep people safe. It was sort of that's the kind of chaos that was unfolding. It was, the military versus the Navy versus the state police versus, every different authority was also aligned with one player or another, and sort of unraveling. You just can't take any of that for granted. You don't know who's, on whose side and who's got what sort of agenda. So I felt like that was useful to show in that regard.
So the Cold War was also like a civil war at the time.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I mean, really, it seemed to be a war between, when I was there, my assessment, it was like various security forces who were aligned with various criminal forces. There was a relationship between various criminal entities and security forces, and so thus all the different authorities were kind of at odds with each other as well. Autodefensas, I mean, it was very complicated because some of them were just people who really were sick of the cartels. Others were coming from, were just rival cartel members. And it's turned into something that's very much more paramilitary and dark. And we saw that beginning to happen, So it was sort of there was this mythology of like people rising up. And underneath that, there was like this paramilitary beforehand. It was really fascinating and complex, but also, tricky to figure out. We again, here, the other lesson in this was we rode in a lot of random trucks. And one of my rules is never get in a truck with anyone you don't know. And we worked with a local fixer who'd been covering the story for months at that point. And the only reason he did that and took the risks he did is because he knew so many people, and we were very in his hands, and we vetted him very, very. He's actually the same guy who was cartel as well. But it's the only reason we were able to jump in this truck or that truck. He'd be like, yeah, it's okay, no, that's not okay. I think the other thing, so I play a bit more of this. The other little point I wanted to make, so South Sudan, season 6. I'll show you a quick clip of this and then I'll play a bit more.
It's not as heavy security, everyone. Even the UN now seems to operate in fear of the government to help build. We were told government forces pushed the opposition a few miles downriver just days before we arrived. But things were still tense. This was a town of 150,000 people. Now feels like a ghost town. We've come to South Sudan to find out how a country that was born of so much promise has turned into such a nightmare. And also to ask, were there warning signs that this could happen? This is a good child.
Yeah, Shannon, yeah. I went to Sachi Cunningham. It's fine. Over 10 years. 7 years.
This is a long film.
Initial reports estimate at least 50,000 have been killed since fighting broke out in December 2013. But Rachel said the number is much higher.
If in my own family alone, I have more than 10, from the side of my husband and from my family. One of the other families.
And people are still here because they're scared.
Yeah. Because there is no peace yet. There's security.
We've got nearly 20,000 people here.
Yeah, here.
Because it's the only safe
Yeah, yeah.
place. People were still arriving, sometimes fleeing violence in towns so remote they can only be reached by boat. Naibol Anok was brought in after rebel militias attacked her family just days ago. Her head was cut by machetes, and she was left for dead. Her daughter Nyobol told us there were more survivors from her village making their way down the Nile. We went to see if we could find them. We're going to a village of War Jawak, just upstream from Malakal. There's a group of people who fled the fighting and just got here, so we're going to see what's going on. Why did you come here?
And then you got young today, then you go be about Kola, Yoga, and Ayadi. Kajo Raga Yadi.
Salam. كيف حالك؟
لا لا يا وش عشان لا ما بس الناس اللي لو جرينا هنا لا لسه في عتاب ما لسه في نقاش.
This is a 20-year-old girl called Achol who just fled from Athar. She said there's a lot of fighting there and there's a lot of killing by opposition forces. And she just got here by boat yesterday.
أنت شفتي كفتن قبل؟
كم مرة؟ There's hundreds of people here just living out in the open. They've got their bags of belongings, little bits of food. This is what parts of South Sudan look like today. Under every tree, people huddled, scared, tired, in shock from what they've just fled. Two aid doctors arrived to assess the levels of malnutrition and tend to the living. But there's no formal tally of the dead. So many people died. Before she left her home, Akol said she watched as her young son was killed. At least that, she said, was certain.
I mostly wanted to show that because I just give you a flavor of the South Sudan story, because I think one issue that I wanted to touch on is there's never been a story where both sides have sort of tried to use us quite so much as tools for their own propaganda. I think that's an issue that really comes up in any sort of conflict situation. But it never really come up for me in the same way, and it was something that we were really conscious about from the beginning. But definitely there was a very, we had to just really discuss everything that was being addressed on both sides, and it was a lot of attempts to do us. And so I think that's just a really important thing, right? Doing these type of things. The other thing I wanted to talk about, which is was important for both of these stories, was when I was kind of going through my little list of, pre-production, anything about pre-production, anything about production, and post. One of the things that our show, and I think a lot of, the advantages of working with an organization is that they're often some sort of security protocol in place, and we take that really seriously. So, for example, anytime we're going out during the pre-production phase, I'm doing what's called the risk assessment. Part of that is like, okay, who are the players? What are their strategies? What are the risks? Are they men? Are they kidnapping? What is it? exactly. And what does that really look like? Do. And so, for South Sudan, it was 28-page document and all sorts of things on it. And part of that is a real set protocol for check-ins. Who you're going to call at what time, and then you create that in the field. So with Mexico, we literally, we had a morning and evening check-in, but whenever we left the town, we would tell someone where we were headed and when we expected to be there. And if they didn't hear from us, they would have the list of sort of who they called for a second. And it just, it's sort of can be annoying. Do that check-in, I have to get a cell signal, and I don't have it. But it's really nice to know, and I think even working as a freelancer, there's ways to set that up and really have safety systems in place. It's no story is so that was one thing I wanted to mention. And there's actually a lot to go over with what we put into risk assessments. So we have oh, I just want this because it's a friend actually, and it's called How to Avoid Being Colonialism. Sort of cynical title, but the Essential Survival Guide for Dangerous Places by Rosie. And I haven't seen others like this, but I'm sure there are. But that's great. I mean, it's a mix of first aid and then just things like how to make an exit plan. Things to think about when you're paying people, literally, I really highly recommend it as signs of alcoholism, because that's how a lot of people deal with there we go. Okay, sorry, I'm jumping around a bit, but again, pre-production, production, post-production. The last point I wanted to get on post-production, the writing process. In all of these films, the language that went into, and Lauren, I think, is really can also speak to this because she's sort of, her to go through our language a little bit, which can be, when you're really just focused on story, you're like, but it's super important. And being very conscious of, there's so much, there's words that we kind of choose automatically, but that can actually fuel conflicts in specific ways, in specific situations. Things like using the term peace talks. If it was something that one side created but the other side hasn't agreed to, that's not actually a peace talk. So you're kind of buying into someone's propaganda. So really thinking about language when you put things together and making sure, things like militant and regime, like all of those have sort of baggage to them that you have to make sure is intended.
And that's really, when you were having to just trust both sides and that's something like that, how are you able to maintain balance sort of in post-production and kind of what's that? What is the right thing to do?
I think it goes back to, like, if it's a human individual story of what they went through, it's, you can then tell whether it's sort of, just sort of instinctively, you can tell whether it's true or trustworthy. And I'm always kind of going back to that as the heart of things rather than some like political message. And I think keeping the human story, keeping the individual story at the heart of it keeps you safe. And making sure that like in language and in time spent on both sides of the conflict, that there's some quality there. But in the end, it's just like people. That's really sort of hard. So all of these are on the Al Jazeera English site with alt lines, 2 words, including Lauren's. Yes, no, I don't know. Did you say it was or wasn't online? It is. It will be soon.
Yeah, Google fault lines, 2 words, Al Jazeera English, and there's a bunch of shows. And this one's South, you can just do South Sudan, and the Mexico one is a lot. The people in Mexico, this one is called Vigilante State. Mexico's Vigilante State. And the CIA torture program is called the Dark Prison.
When you're out in the field, how do you deal with, like, obviously it becomes like a sense of paranoia because you're on that level, you don't know. And when you're out in the field, how do you manage that? Or where do you kind of rationalize it? How do you kind of do it in a way where you're not like punching? Most people I don't know are having this situation because obviously that can affect your work and your job.
Mostly I get paranoid and fearful. If that comes and there's fear, it's always beforehand. Once I'm in a situation, it's like, I don't know, everything changes and it's just like you decide if you're going left or right and you're just very attuned to like this. And it's just a decision and it's not like fear. And I think the other way you rationalize is like, Kabul is a city of what? It's a big city of people like making laundry and having kids and like sending their kids to school and most of them are just fine, you know? And like usually something happens. So it's like if you really pick apart the risk, it's very small. I mean that's different when you're like that photographer was covering firefighting, but most of my work is lately has been in places that are maybe dangerous but not in the violence itself. But yeah, even then, I feel like once you're in the flow of just working, ordinarily, yeah, your daughter and husband from the risk. Definitely she does not. No, she's not living up to it. Even now, I mean, just making it fair to like, there's a lot to learn about it being out there. You're just here. Like when my husband gets like does other sun stages, he goes off the skis, like avalanche, curling, mountains and stuff. And I worry a lot about him doing that. And I think he worries about me here a lot more than I worry about myself. No, I kind of feel that from them. Yeah. I mean, they know that there's a protocol, and I assure them of like the protocol and the safety measures, and it's done really well. But I feel different. Can you speak to the role of breaking down the team? Yeah. A lot of things that are how much you're all reporters, so how do you share that? Yeah, and so for me personally, like before Fault Lines, I was a still photographer for years. I started out at a small time newspaper. And so I've always kind of, but I also was a writer in college, so I've always kind of been both a very visual journalist and with words. And my work, my path has been, I did a lot of sort of starting out, I did a lot of sort of field producing, and I was also shooting. And so I often blended figuring out the story and shooting at the same time. But typically, and I'm still doing a lot of that now because I could take another photographer with us. As a producer, I could have taken a photographer with us on the CIA shoot and the South Sudan shoot and Mexico, but it's so much to me to be able to move really swiftly as a small team has been so important. And I have a lot of opinions about how I want things to look. So just an intimacy that works because I know the story. So but there's a cost to that. Like I don't produce as well when I'm shooting, and I don't shoot as well when I'm also producing. But it's been something I've chosen to do. Typically, Fault Lines teams are 3 people, and the producer is both really driving the editorial decisions, like they're owning the story fully from start to finish, often from like the
pitch phase, like this is the story I think we should tell, and they get that signed off on, and they have to like, pitch that story to our boss. And yeah, okay, but maybe a little differently, or okay. And then the producer writes a budget and figures out, you know, how many countries, where you need to go, how long you need to be there, do you need an extra, you know, all these sort of things that is writing up the budget. And then contacts with people, figuring out who we're going to talk to, how the schedule is going to go, who the photographer is going to be. Usually the correspondent is assigned. So then the correspondent on our show is often coming off lots of different stories. They're managing a lot, so they're not as much owner, you know, there's not quite as much ownership of the story, depending on how busy they are. But once they're on, you know, in the field with us, they're very much on top of it. Quick study on research, and the producers that are catching them up, and then they're doing the interview. And the shooters, and you know, downloading footage at night, and then when we come back, it's usually the producer who's mostly in charge of the writing, working with an editor, so I'm doing writing, the editors correspondent helps with that. On this project, correspondent helps.
Is the audio self-contained, or does it do the audio?
Usually the shooter does the audio. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a second question about pitches. So you with that? Yeah. So most of the people in this room have written a pitch or two in the past year or so, and there's that wonderful period where you turn it in, that it's wow, what a story, and all of a sudden things that you thought you could swear the person told you were going to happen, all of these things just start falling away, and they start. Subject starts losing interest, or it turns into, you know, they have no idea about the time commitment and all this stuff. You've written a lot of pitches. Is there anything you can say about getting a realistic pitch, one that somebody would still be interested in doing?
Yeah, it still happens. Even after dozens and dozens and dozens. I mean, I think you can tell in reading a pitch if it's been better, you know, like that. But, you know, the first question is like, oh, this sounds amazing when people actually talk to the subject. And so that's really important. I mean, I think you don't want to be the one who submitted a pitch that sounds amazing, but it's totally undoable because it's actually not that's been right. And I think being very clear about that in the way you can be writing it, like, you know, and kind of having some caveats or backup plans, and just making clear like what is high enough data and what is really doable and secured. And I'll often have, you know, a line with like secured elements, and you know, so it's very clear what's secured and what is sort of pending. Because it's your, you know, it is your reputation. If you submitted a great pitch, but it's not doable, it's not doesn't.
I just have a general question. At what point did you know you come to realize that you wanted to cover international conflicts more?
I mean, like in the beginning, it was never a choice. I mean, it was never like a decision, like, oh, I want to do. I mean, definitely never was like I set out to cover a project per se. I feel like I've been driven to cover stories that I found really interesting and challenging, and also to go to places that I haven't been in a different. And so that's kind of been the motivation, and still is for sure. I started traveling pretty young, and so I think that's always been interesting.
Last question. How to work it
Oh, yes. Oh God, don't make me sing it. Because I've forgotten it. Now I have to relearn it. A friend of ours is a columnist for the New York Times. She told me this great anecdote that I was hearing from her heart. She writes a housing column every week, and one of them was how to survive solitary confinement. And I was telling Sachi earlier, I mean, everyone has like one story, but everyone has like one fear that they kind of can't get rid of. And mine is being completely blind without contacts. Like, you're not, I can't see, like I don't have access to contacts or glasses. Partly with fear, I was thinking solitary confinement, but her lesson, her how-to was how to survive solitary confinement. And part of that was to, you should memorize a song now, just in case you're ever put in solitary confinement. Because if you are, it's a great solace to have a song. But I'm not going to tell you this song. No, it was Romeo and Juliet. You're not run by, I don't even know who it's by. It's a great song. But I've forgotten that we need to relate it. Aaron Clapton. Singeli, thank you everyone for coming, and please join us. Christina is going to tell you.
So because we've had some faculty and speakers here all day, if they could go back first into 303 and go ahead and grab some snacks, and then a few minutes to just wrap up, and then all students are welcome to come back and grab whatever's left. And then at 7 o'clock we start back up again. And as I'm going back and unwrapping the food, Sachi will tell you what's going to happen at 7 o'clock. So at 7 o'clock, we are going to screen how this actually all started. Is we got an email about this documentary. Oh, you know what, Kim? I was going to add something.